everyone. Very happy to introduce AD Fox, who's joining us tonight for an author chat, and she's going to start off by introducing herself and telling us a bit about her books.
Well, yes, my name's AD Fox, and I have come to writing crime fiction over the last year and a half. I'm one of those really annoying people who, when the pandemic arrived, suddenly started writing lots of books. But I have a background in children's fiction, so for me, there was an opportunity because I'd be dashing around doing lots of school visits and festivals, and of course all that stopped. So all of a sudden, I had the opportunity to start writing crime thrillers, which I'd always wanted to do, and I actually had a couple which are half written and left because I just didn't have time to keep coming back to them. So finally got the chance to scratch that itch and get out there. And I'm in company with a lot of children's authors who've also turned to writing crime fiction. I don't know, there's a bit of a thing about us children's authors. And actually, I think often children's fiction isn't that far removed from crime fiction in the sense that it's very fast paced. It has to grab your attention very fast. So encouraged by various of them, sort of buddies with Gordon Smith, who writes the Alex Smith books, the DCI Ket books, and Barry Hutchison, who writes the DCI, let's call that Logan, I think, books. We've sort of almost like grown up through children's fiction together. So very much encouraged by them to crack on and see what could happen with it. And I can't quite believe it that I'm just about to bring out the 5th book. Not of the series. I've had a 4-book opening series, and the next one that's coming out next on November the 9th is sort of a standalone, but it's linked to the same universe as my Henry and Sparrow series. So that's me, yeah. Children's author turned crime fiction author, and inhabiting this whole new world where I'm allowed to put swears in and write sex scenes. Which I wasn't aching to do in children's fiction, to be honest, but it is quite freeing.
Alex Scarrow said hello, or he actually says hi, Sparks.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, he and his wife Debbie are brilliant, really lovely supporters of what I'm doing, and we support each other really. And that's the lovely thing about this community of authors and increasingly readers, because a lot of my lovely ARC readers have come from this group as well, from UK Crime Book Club. Is there's so much support and connection and fun going on behind the scenes as well. It's really a lot of hard work when you're writing books fast to meet people's appetites for more and more and more. So it's really nice to be able to share the situation, the weird situation that you're in, and the strange life that you lead with other authors and crime fiction lovers as well.
We've got loads more people saying hello as well. So Lloyd has said hello. TG Reed says fantastic series, love, 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 and hello. And Alex Scarrow agrees about the swears.
Because Alex has also been a very successful children's writer. And so, yeah, we all know that. When you're writing children's fiction, you want to be authentic in the way that you want to write adult fiction. But of course, you can't be totally authentic with the language because it's just not allowed. And I heard this story about the really wonderful Andy Mulligan, who wrote this book called Trash, which some of you may have read or some of your children may have read, which was up, I think it actually might have won a Carnegie Award, but it was up for the Blue Peter Award too, which my book Frozen in Time won a few years ago as well. So I know what a big deal the Blue Peter Award is. And yeah, Andy was up for that. And then they took it out of the running because it had the word shit in it. That was the extent of it. And we now know that the later Harry Potter books are kind of as bad as that, but they couldn't have that because it was Blue Peter. So yeah, it is a bit of an issue.
You can always have fun, which is what I try to encourage my children to do instead of swearing, with finding like imaginative rhyming things. So saying duck.
It's like that Father Ted thing. Fop off, you grasshole.
That's what I try and tell the kids that I teach too. Like, we're not swearing, we're just going to say duck.
Or make up our own. And I think as children's authors, you also find a way around it, because when you want to write a scene where you know that there would be expletives bouncing off the wall, you can kind of write that. You kind of let loose a load of expletives. There's one book I used. He said he was a bit fed up. He actually said it with a few more P's and F's than that, but so the audience kind of knows it, and I think they understand the game. Actually, I think what's a lot harder is drama, TV dramas for kids. And I remember I grew up with Grange Hill, and we all knew the language that was going on there, and things like EastEnders as well, the kind of, the worst you can say is you little scrote or something. You can't do any more than that. But we all have to sort of just go along with that and just understand that that's the way it is, and it's not appropriate to sling bad language left, right, and centre. In fact, I would say I'm quite tame in my language in my books. I mean, you've read one of them now, Caroline, so you can tell me whether or not you agree. But I will, I'll put the swears in where it just feels natural to, but I don't want to overdo it, because I don't swear a lot in my own life. I certainly do enough of it because it's a rich and full language, and I want to make the use of it. But I'm actually not one for doing it very often.
You've been asked if you have Dracula lurking behind you. Hopefully it's you that's been asked that.
Dracula? Oh, what, that thing there, like the cape?
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right, because it's on the run up to Halloween. Dracula is roosting in the pod happily. That, or it's just one of my very furry fleeces that I put on when it gets cold in the pod at the end of the garden.
So we're going to start you off with the questions that we got before we went live. Leslie Lloyd says she's intrigued by the dowser in your book.
Yeah, the whole dowsing element thing, which, I know is a bit left of field. I mean, I know that a lot of people in the club really love fairly pure procedural crime fiction, and mine has got procedural indefinitely. And I have a retired DI who is fantastic and goes through my stuff, and we have a traffic light system of green, amber and red, green being, yeah, that's absolutely right, first class research, Ali, and then amber is on the edge, not sure, we might get away with it, and then red is that would never happen. And so I've got her, but aside from that, the dowsing thing is a bit left of field, and again, this is something I actually started writing the Dying Dolls about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was really triggered by the idea of this dowsing. I met this dowser when I was working for the BBC. I used to do stuff on air, but I also used to run a regional radio station magazine called the Radio Solent magazine, and there was a really lovely presenter called Mike Powell, who you might occasionally hear on BBC Radio 4 or Radio 2 on the World Service. And Mike was really into all the supernatural stuff. So we had this little series in the magazine called Mike's Mysteries, and we used to go and check out interesting stuff like that. And we met this dowser down in Dorset, and he absolutely blew my mind. He really did. And I'm an open-minded skeptic. And we'd gone down to talk to him about, dowsing for water and things. And he said, I can find anything really. And he said, go outside and hide your keys. So I left him with Mike, sitting at the back of his bungalow, looking over some fields at the back. And I went round to the front of the bungalow. There was no possible way this guy could see where I was going. And so I went and I hid my keys under a leaf. But I went up to one side, and then I turned around and went back the other side. And so I sort of moved around a bit and then left it under a leaf. And then he came out with Mike, and I had my big old Nikon F5 camera. This is pre-digital days. And it's one of these massive paparazzi style cameras, which if I held it in front of my face, you literally couldn't see my face. And I say this because, you think, is somebody watching you and reading your body language? He couldn't have seen my face or me doing anything other than holding this camera. And so he walked up and he turned right and he went up this path away from where I'd left it, but in the direction that I'd initially gone. And I'm thinking, oh no, how am I going to write this up? I'm going to have all the shots and everything, but how am I going to write up what happens when he doesn't find my keys? This is going to be so embarrassing. And then he turned around and went back in the other direction. And then he stopped dead. Right by his toe was the leaf under which were my keys. And I was absolutely staggered. And I didn't even say it. I was so dumbfounded, literally, that I'd made no noise at all. And he went, again, he was holding his rods at the time, and the rods had just gone whoop, or up, I forget, up or down. And he went, no, okay, I'll keep going. And I went, stop, it's right there. So it was one of those real ocular proof scenarios where you actually see it happen right in front of you. And so I was absolutely amazed by that, and I'd always wanted to look into it a bit more. And so some years later, I was having a chat with a friend about all the various detective things that were on TV at the time, lots of different styles of things. And I said to him, do you know, the only thing they haven't got is a detective teamed up with a dowser. I think that would work really well. And this mate, Harry, said, yeah, you should do that. And so that's when I started writing what was later to become the Dying Dolls. So I got my female detective working with the dowser. And when I did the research for it, I spoke to one of the sort of top bods in the British Dowsing Association, I think that's what they're called, and asked him about all kinds of details about dowsing. And I was just flabbergasted to hear him say, yeah, we do work with the police. This does actually happen. We occasionally get asked to look into something, but you won't ever hear about it. You know, police are very careful. Our people who use this as professional helpers, as consultants, will not generally make it known, because the risk to us, if we find something, that immediately we become suspects, because, you know, how did you know where that was if you weren't involved in some way? So although people might think it's a little bit woo and spooky, actually it's much more grounded than I realized at that point. And these things really do happen. Although I guess Lucas is probably extraordinary in his talents naturally, but it does happen.
Leslie Lloyd says her father-in-law is really into dowsing.
Yeah, and I've tried it. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I mean, I've got this is my version of Sid. Sid is a little blue bottle top thing that Lucas uses. And when we were kids, we used to get a needle and thread and sit on the dining room table and just ask questions. And you'd make it circle. So if I make it circle, and you try to keep your hands as still as possible and not influence it, which is probably almost impossible. But and then I'd say, okay, if there is a doll with pink boots in this room, can you now swing back and forth? And if you watch it, yeah, it's now swinging back and forth, because there is a doll with pink boots in this room. Which is really quite worrying. So we used to do that when we were kids with a needle and thread, and literally anyone can do this. If you're feeling idle this evening, any of you after dinner tonight, just put your hands on the table and just let the needle and thread hang between them and just ask some questions. And what's particularly fun is to ask somebody else to ask you questions that you can't know the answer to, and then see what happens. And what was really quite startling when we used to do that was the number of times it was bang on right. And often it's yes or no answers, you know, and spin for no and rook for yes or something. So we used to do that a lot, and it was just a fun thing. And it's just, to me, it amazes me that once I've started talking about this, number of people that I've known very well for years, go, oh yeah, I douse all the time to help myself make decisions. I douse to find stuff. It is a bit of an amazing art, but it's not as supernatural as some people think.
Well, that's because some comments come in about that as we've gone. So TG Reader said Dowser down in Dorset sounds like a Squeeze or Ian Jury song.
Dowser down in Dorset.
And Alex Scarrow wants to know if there's any scientific explanation behind dowsing.
Well, there are lots of different theories, and what Lucas talks about is kind of a conglomeration of various things that dowsers have said to me, is that everything on the planet and off it is made up of vibrations. So a dowser is able to tune in, key into certain vibrations. So a piece of metal will be a vibration, a piece of plastic will be a vibration, you know, cardboard, paper will have a vibration. And some vibrations are very, very clear, like water, which is why you hear such a lot about dowsing for water, and also because it's a very useful skill that people have been using for centuries. So yeah, it's about keying into the patterns and the frequencies of those things. And some people are innately good at it. I don't know how good I am. I actually, when I was researching for this a few years ago, I actually did a couple of courses. Now, anyone who's read my books will know that I have a very well-honed sense of the ridiculous, and I really enjoyed the courses that I did. I went up to Leamington Spa for a weekend, and then I spent a day in Glastonbury during the Goddess Festival, which I think has a mention in the first book, actually. So, I mean, listen, if you're into being a goddess and all the crystals and all this stuff, good on you. If you're enjoying it and it's enriching your life, brilliant. But sometimes it does make me giggle a little bit. And the the courses that I went on, the one in Leamington Spa was okay, but I didn't see any evidence. Even the people running it didn't show me any evidence of what they could do. There was a lot of walking around and talking about it, but nobody found anything. And when I went up to this Glastonbury tour, again, it was fun, but it was a lot of woo, a lot of tie-dye, a lot of people really believing in it and meaning it, but no evidence. And although I'm very open-minded, there is a hard-nosed former newspaper and BBC journalist in me that goes, come on. So it was a very interesting experience to look into it all. But maybe I'm not sure I really have the gift, apart from those times with a needle and thread. When push comes to shove, if somebody says, find something for me, I don't know if I could do it. But I absolutely believe that there are people who can do it, and that science is probably something we'll uncover more about in centuries to come.
So back to the pre-questions. Meg Jolly says she adores your books and would love to know how you come up with such excellent and unpredictable plots. She does have another question as well, but we'll go with that one first.
Yeah, well, Meg can do that herself as well. She also writes fantastic stuff. D.I. Ward, I think, is hers, isn't it? Brilliant stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it's the same way Meg operates too. We all have these random things that pop into our head. And I know that many of my fellow authors plan a lot, and I really ought to, but I've never been a planner. I basically come up with a premise and then just jump in and see where it goes. And I let it unfold in my head a little bit like I'm reading somebody else's book. I get to the end of a chapter sometimes and I have literally no clue where I'm going next. And I kind of just visualize what I think I'd like to see if I were reading the book. And that seems to work quite well. But also I do draw a great deal upon my own life experiences, particularly since I've been writing the crime, because I've finally had an excuse to write about some of the stuff that happened to me, in my teens and 20s. Working, for example, in a radio station for Dead Air, and working as a Pontin's Bluecoat for Seven Deadly Things, which is set in a holiday camp. So definitely some of the things that have happened in those books are literally plucked out of my own life story. Anybody who's read Seven Deadly Things will know that there's a juggling unicyclist in it. That's based on a real person. And some of the things that happen with him are based on my experiences. The young bluecoat at the beginning of the book, right at the beginning, who's called Ellie, a bit similar to Ali, which is my name. Her experiences with the kids and singing the alligator song. We used to sing the crocodile song. So it is shamelessly plundered from my own life experience, and the humor that came with that as well. So it's a combination, I think, of just playing the what if game and throwing in elements of truth as well. And honestly, when you look at some of the stuff that happens in real life and historically, there's so much source material to get you triggered and start you writing.
Very true. She also wants to know what's next for you in crime fiction. Are we going to see more Kate?
Yes, and this is the one that's coming out. This is my depiction of the new one. The book isn't actually, I haven't got the paperback in my hands yet, but Sharp Intake of Death is the one that's coming out on the 9th of November. Kate Sparrow is actually in this book. It's not a Henry and Sparrow book. It's an Archie Tozer novel. And Archie is a completely different character who's a very sleazy tabloid journalist. And again, this is something I started writing years ago and then didn't have time to get back to. So Kate sort of takes a holiday from all the intense stuff going on with Lucas Henry, and ends up being thrown into a completely new load of intense stuff with Archie Tozer and the assorted characters in his story as well. So that's what's happening next. And I think for a lot of us who write series, we run the risk if we keep writing one book after another, and many of us writing them very quickly, because we're able to and because the audience demands it. You can feel a sense of burnout after a while. So my plan is to write a series and then and treat it like the first season of a TV show. So, for example, the first Henry and Sparrow books, there's 4 books in the series, but that's not the end of it. That's the first 4 books and what I consider a whole story across one 4-book arc. And then I'm taking a break just to freshen my brain up. And I'm going off with Archie, who's a completely different character, even though it's in the same kind of universe, because he knows Kate Sparrow. And in fact, he's mentioned right at the beginning in the Dying Dolls. You get a mention of Archie Tozer, fleeting mention. And like that way, when you come back to writing your next chunk of that series and go back to those characters, you're not feeling quite so burnt out. And I think that's really important. I paused after writing the last Henry and Sparrow book, and across the summer I wrote the children's fiction book, which is with my agents at the moment, and then I cracked on with the Archie Tozer book. So this year I have written 5 books, because I mostly finished the first one of the Henry and Sparrow series the year before. So that is, I think, for any author, a kind of slightly crazy output. And you do have to be careful not to overdo it, because you will end up just wiping yourself out. Your battery will go flat if you're not careful.
Mary Ryan wanted to know where the idea came from for the new Archie Tozer book.
Well, we sort of touched on it earlier. Archie, I mean, I used to be a journalist for the local newspaper in Southampton, the Southampton Daily Echo. Excuse me. And some of my contemporaries went on to work on the Nationals. I ended up going to the BBC instead and working regional radio instead, and then went on to do bits and pieces for Radio 4. So that was my trajectory. But some of my contemporaries went to work on the Daily Mail and the Sun and the News of the World, and they were, you know, good journalists, but I knew some of them sort of fed back later that they weren't sure they'd made the right decision once they got to those newspapers, because you may be a very big fish and doing really well in your regional newspaper. When you get up to the Nationals, you're treated very differently, unless you're kind of a celebrity level and really worked your way up for a long time. So you write stuff that you're kind of told to. You go out and you get your stories, and then they can be totally mashed up by the sub-editors who write the headlines and who write the openings often, and you can have your stuff just completely butchered and you have no power at all. So Archie Tozer is one of those characters, and he's hardened himself to it and decided that's fine. He's a journalist. He works for The Stand, which is a classic tabloid, and it's quite a sensationalist, slightly sleazy tabloid, always looking for cheap celebrity stories. And Archie has just put his conscience in a box and just left it there so that he can carry on being successful as a journalist, and not really, he tries very hard not to examine what he's doing, because he likes the lifestyle, and he's sort of just built himself a bit of a shell so he can do this thing. And honestly, that's very much what happens. I know a lot of photographers as well. I did my research on the paparazzi side of it too, and I think it's the same thing. They grow a shell because that's the only way they can do their job. If they feel too bad about it, then they can't. I was speaking to one of my photographer buddies, Chris, who is not really paparazzi, but he's done a lot of photography over the years. And we had a meet up in a pub, and I said to him, you know, have you ever been in that situation where you've had your camera up and standing outside court waiting for somebody to come out, and you just think this is wrong? And he said, well, I didn't let myself think that way, but there were times when actually I did lower my camera, but I wouldn't ever tell you which ones, and I wouldn't ever confess it to anybody else. So I think that real dichotomy of somebody who has worked their way up and was really passionate about what they did, and then finds themselves in a situation where to continue to be successful, they have to do things they're not entirely comfortable with. I mean, that happened even on a regional level with me. There were times when I had to do what's known as death knocks. You know, someone's just been killed, and your editor sends you out to stand on their doorstep and knock on the door and say, can you talk to the local paper about this? And, you know, that's a terrible thing if you put yourself in their shoes. And I found the only way that really worked was to be wretched, is to stand on that doorstep and say, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm from the Echo. My editor's just sent me. I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but if you do want to talk about Bill, who's just been run over, or just died in a shootout with the drugs gang, I'm here. And, you know, not one time did I ever get turned away. It's absolutely weird. They said, come on in, sit down, have a cup of tea. And they always used to start off with almost the same line. It was no angel, but... And then they tell you the stuff that you weren't going to get in court, you know, that the detail. And it was very kind of emotional stuff you'd often get. And so after a while, what was unfortunate about that was because I got a name for myself of being quite good at it, because I had this soft soap approach which seemed to work. So I got more of them and it was not fun. And I that's something about being a journalist that I really, really hated.
Tom Gillespie wants to know how you managed to write so fast.
Tom, honestly, I don't know. I think it probably does come from the fact that I came up through newspapers and radio, which are both writing mediums where you have to go fast. You do not have the luxury of overthinking it. You go out, you get your story, you rush back to the newsroom, you transcribe your shorthand, you bash it out at great speed, and that's how you do it. And if you don't do it in time, you miss your deadline, you're in a lot of trouble. So, and the same goes with radio, though it's not so much writing in radio. Again, if you're writing a little script for what's on package or the news, you got till 5 to the hour, and there were times when I'd be bashing something out and running into the radio studio 2 minutes to the hour, and I had to have it then because it had to be broadcast. There was no getting away from it. So I think I'm quite a kind of quick turnover person anyway, but if you've trained that way, then you just do it, and you get into the habit of thinking, I've got to write something. And even if you're not in the mood for it, sometimes you just think, okay, I've only got today, and then tomorrow I've got to do this and I've got to do that the following day. So if I'm going to hit my deadline, it has to be today. And even though I'm not really feeling it, I'm just going to let my fingers move and see what happens. And I was able to do that and have been able to do that for many years, which doesn't mean I think it's the best way. I think, if I was in a position where my life was a bit more relaxed and I could afford to take my time and churn out one book a year, it would be really nice. And, it may be that I'd bring something more to it. I don't honestly know what the answer is to that, whether it makes me a better or a worse writer that I'm going faster. But I do know that I do seem to thrive on a quick turnaround and sort of fairly heavy deadlines.
And then we've only got one last question from before we went live, which was Nick Cook, who wants to know what the most difficult part of your writing process is.
Definitely the police procedural stuff, I think, because and one of the reasons that I stopped writing before was that I worried myself to death about getting it wrong. And I've since reached the conclusion that as long as I've got Sarah, my ex-DI, checking things through for me, and I've also got a couple of other police buddies who I walk my dogs with, and periodically I'll say to them, what kind of gun would you use if you wanted to shoot somebody close up? And they'll tell me. Now that I know that I've got people who can check for me, then I'm much more relaxed about it. But I worry about slowing things down. I'm a very pacey writer, and I hate the idea of things getting too turgid with too much detail. But I also know that some people love that detail. And I've read it in other people's books, and it doesn't bother me particularly. I think, again, it's this little ghost on my shoulders from my radio days and my newspaper days saying, keep it fast, keep it fast, keep it fast. Don't let it slow down. And so that's what really worries me. And I think there's a fair bit of police procedural in my books, but you will notice that I often take the opportunity to get away from it as quickly as I can, so I don't have to worry too much about it. But it's amazing what you learn once you start researching for the books, and the kind of daft mistakes that you can make quite by accident. But then you get caught out by dumb things as well, like in the third book of the series, 7 Deadly Things. I set it in East Anglia, and when I worked in East Anglia at the holiday camp, people broadly referred to the area that I was working in as the Fens. So I just referred to it, and this is confidence is your worst problem. I was completely confident that the area that I lived in and worked in for that period of time was known as the Fens. And that's somebody really furious in one of the reviews saying, it's not the Fens. You need to go north. It's only north, and there's certain areas of East Anglia that are officially the Fens, and the rest of it is not. Fortunately, with the Kindle ebook versions, I'm allowed to go back in and tweak. So if you get the books now, you won't find that mistake in there. But that was so embarrassing. And generally, research, I take it quite seriously. I take pride in it because of my journalistic background, and I am mortified if I get something wrong. But everybody does, and over time, you realise that you're not, nobody's an expert at everything. You're not going to get everything right. And I think as long as the spirit of it is there, most people forgive you. This lady didn't, but most people do.
You have like an unforgivable error, though. I think because I'm a scientist, if someone gets like a glaringly obvious science thing wrong, in a book that would stop me reading. Like I had
Really?
an author I enjoyed and I stopped reading because they made a really
Oh
real
no,
DNA.
no, Caroline, you've got to be more forgiving. Or message them or send them an email and just say, did you know that this isn't right? And very often, particularly on the ebook versions, they'll go, oh my God, and they'll go, and you will help. You'll help that book. I mean, when it comes to science, again, I've got a bunch of people. I've got special ops guys that I've worked with my children's fiction over the years. I've got a brilliant earth scientist called Dr. Simon Boxall, who's thanked in a lot of my children's fiction books as well. And he's always on Radio 4 and things talking about earth science stuff. And this is how I get through, because I'm not clever enough to have all the answers. And now that I know that you're a scientist, you're going to be on my list. I'm going to run some stuff by you if you're not very careful, because I think that's the way to do it, to use the expertise that's out there and just not assume that you know things yourself, and certainly never rely just on what you can Google.
Well, we keep a list of like useful people in the group.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and it's
actually
brilliant.
Normally, if you drop a question in, we'll get someone who knows the answer.
Yeah, that is a fantastic resource. I've seen other authors doing that, and yeah, I'm almost certainly going to be one of them in the future.
Alex Sparrow does it quite a lot.
Yeah, well, he's very wise.
But there are because there are police officers. There's like Kate Bendelow, who's CSI and things in the group. So there are people who know what they're talking about.
And it's brilliantly useful, and it's also useful to stay up to date as well, because things do change quite quickly and quite frequently, it seems, as well. Certain phrases go out very fast. There's been long debate about whether it's CSI or whether it's scene of crime, and SIO officers, and it seems to change from person to person, and also almost from region to region as well. It's fun to do, but I beg clemency for anybody who reads any author's stuff, that most of the time there's an awful lot of effort that goes into it, and several different editors who are seeing it and reading it and checking it too. And I have at least 4 people checking through my stuff. I've got an editor and a follow-up copy editor, and my sort of sense checker, and my police person, and then other people that particular areas as well. So it does get checked and checked and checked, and it is taken serious, and we really do care about it. But we're human, so sometimes we are going to mess up.
Yeah, that's okay. I think everyone has the odd error, don't they, in things, and it's all right. You just don't want it to be too big of a...
No, you don't. Well, you certainly don't want to put people off. You don't want to have people wincing all the way through it. But most of the time, it's about telling a really cracking yarn, and keeping people engaged and entertained, and wanting to keep going, and hopefully liking your characters too. I think that's something that's really important, and it always pleases me greatly when I see reviews of people say they really love the characters, and they're really into Lucas and to Kate, and they want to find out what happens next. That's a really lovely thing.
So tell us a little bit about your ciphers that you've been sharing with the group. It made me really happy. I enjoy doing them.
I love a cipher.
My brain.
I really do, and I'm hoping to do a few more. Actually, the cipher thing kicked off while I was writing my children's story. It's called 100 Summers, one of my Ali Sparks books, and it features a girl from 100 years ago who's left lots of clues around an old mansion house, which a modern day kid finds when he's there for a summer school, and so he has to undo all these ciphers. So one of them that I put up, in fact, a number of them that I put up and asked the club to check out for me, are actually in that book when it comes out, 100 Summers, which I hope will come out in a year or two. So the obvious one to use is book ciphers. So if I gave you if you have the print copy of The Dying Dolls, I could give you a series of numbers, which would be the first number would be the page, the second number would be the line number, and the third number would be the word number. And so you could go through and you could check and you could put together a clue. And if you have friends that you want to do this with, as long as you've got the same edition of the paperback, then you can have such fun with this. And these ciphers are pretty hard to crack if nobody knows what that book is. If it's between you and a buddy and nobody else knows what the book is, and it's not an easy one. If you did Harry Potter or something, it might be quite easy to find. But if it's something a bit obscure, then it really does work. The difficulty with ebooks, of course, is that you don't have that pagination. You have percentages, because everybody is reading it on a different format. and just literally the size of your phone will dictate how many words are on the page. So when I've done ciphers for ebooks, it has to be the first number of the chapter, and the second number is the sentence, and the third number is the word within the sentence. So if I do a cipher for an ebook, it's a bit more constrained because it has to be really on the first page of each chapter, because you don't want to have massive numbers and take your cipher crackers right deep into the book. It gets too confusing and complicated. But what was really good, and I think again I used this and got the club to help me check it out and to make sure that it was right, was discovering the sonnets, because anyone can do the sonnets, because you start off with the Roman numeral, which is the title of the sonnet, and then you can count the lines down, and there are always the same number of lines in a sonnet, and then you can count across, and there are always roughly the same number of words in each line as well. So sonnets are a really good cipher, although a bit more crackable probably if somebody works out the Roman numerals. But it's just fun. I love it. I love this kind of stuff. We like our puzzles, don't we, Caroline?
I do. I love a good puzzle. They keep your brain going.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I've noticed you doing your jigsaw puzzles, and in the new book that's coming out, the Sharp Intake of Death book, my assassin is called Mr. Whimsy, and I'm sure you know what a whimsy is. People who do jigsaw puzzles will know that a whimsy is a particular kind of puzzle, and I've just really enjoyed putting Mr. Whimsy in because he's obsessed with jigsaw puzzles, and that's his mindfulness before he goes out and kills somebody. He quite likes to do a bit of jigsawing to get himself in the mood. So I've actually been doing a jigsaw myself the last couple of weeks to get myself in the zone as well. And I have actually made, and there's going to be a jigsaw, should be arriving any day, of this cover as well. So that's going to be a prize for a competition, which I will be sharing with the club, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. If you want to win the paperback and the jigsaw to go with it, both of which can be signed if you want them. And yeah, the jigsaw thing is really good. I think it's just really good for your brain to do these things, the ciphers and the crosswords and the sudokus and the sudokus. I can never work out that word. And the jigsaws just help you to chill out in a world where we need to chill out quite a lot, I think.
They're the only thing where I have to focus, just with the jigsaw. The only thing where I look at and I'm not thinking of anything else.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to listen to the radio, a bit of comedy or something on iPlayer, and just.
I have lost you. I can hear you. If you log out and log back in again, people can admire my T-Rex skull behind me while we're waiting for Ali to log back in. Leslie, I'll ask you a question when she comes back. I would say not gory, but not cozy. So they're inventively interesting.
We're back.
You are back.
I'm back.
So before I ask you Leslie's question, tell me what a whimsy is, because I don't actually know.
Well, the thing is, I would tell you, but I can't, because that's the question that I'm going to be setting later on. So you look it up, you'll go, that's what it is.
I'll look it up. Leslie wants to know where your books are on the Cosy to Gore score.
Sorry, where my books are?
On the Cosy to Gore score.
Oh, right. That's a very good question, actually. I think they're about midway. It's a difficult thing. I know some people really love the gore and the darkness. I'm not really one of them, although I'm not against a bit of it. I mean, the Dying Dolls is pretty grim, when these female runners keep getting kidnapped and being put into a rather awful art installation about the art of decay, and that's pretty sick, I've been told. But I'm more about, if I'm honest, I'm more about the wider story and the characters than about the gore. So it's not quite Miss Marple cozy, but it's certainly not kind of reaching into Stephen King territory. And I also, I don't dwell too much on misery. There's a bit, obviously, you've got people who are dead. Basically, I go towards the kind of thing that I would like to read myself, and I love a good thriller. I don't mind a bit of gore. I don't mind a bit of, but I don't want to be absolutely bathed in it. Mine's much more about the thrill, the adventure, the cracking the problems. It's not even that whodunit. I mean, some of mine you don't find out to the very end, and it's always nice when people don't figure it out. But sometimes people do, and that doesn't really worry me either that much, because very often mine's more about the why done it, and the story that comes with the murder, and why it's occurred, what's led to it. And if you're looking for a whodunit in a sharp intake of death, forget it, because you find out whodunit about not even halfway through. and it's not really about that. It's about just lots of people's lives intertwining, and where they start at the beginning of the story and where they end, what gets resolved, what doesn't get resolved, because I don't tie up everything. I have an aversion to things being tied up too neatly, but I like to leave every character in a slightly different place, sometimes better, sometimes worse. And for me, that's the kind of story that I like to tell. And there's a lot of humor in it as well, particularly in the Archie Tozer book. It's not so much a crime thriller, it's more of a satirical thriller, I would say. So I'm going to veer back and forth between the two. And as I was saying earlier, I like that palate cleanser between finishing one series and going back to the same characters. It's nice to do something a bit different. So a sharp intake of death, although there's crime and there's murder and it's dark and it's twisted, it's also meant to be quite satirical and quite funny. I used to write comedy for Radio 4 and stuff, so it's a scratch I can't quite, an itch I can't quite give up scratching, that one.
I described them as inventive.
But thank you, I'll have that.
While you're off the screen, because I was like, they're not gory, but they're not like I am. Leslie will tell you that we probably sit quite differently on what we enjoy, because I do like cozy crime.
Yeah.
I like a slow paced.
Right. So where would you put them on the Gore scale?
So they're sort of over what I would normally read, but they're not out of the scope of what I would read.
I don't really want people to stay awake all night in a rictus of horror. That's not what I set out to do. I'd like people to stay awake all night wondering what's going to happen to the characters. That is my thing. I want you to love the characters. I want you to care about them if at all possible, and to be hooked on what's going to happen next, far more than I want people to be repulsed or filled with horror. I love a bit of Stephen King, but I veer much more towards his books which are character-led rather than horror-led. And the same with writers like Christopher Brookmyre. I really love his stuff. I love a bit of Linwood Barclay too. And they're similar in that they have their moments of things being like, ugh, but primarily it's about character and about you getting into their stories and into their lives and starting to care about what happens next.
See, I find Stephen King like a Marmite author to me. I either 100% really love his books or I don't finish them.
Increasingly, I've become the same. I mean, when I was in my teens and 20s, I would just pretty much eat up every Stephen King going. But I think your tastes shift as you get older. I think certainly when you become a parent, your tastes shift again as well. So anything involved in too much death of children, I steer clear of. And I much prefer his stuff that is more fantastical than horror. And I gather he's now writing crime fiction as well, but I haven't yet got to that.
He has done some, I think. I prefer his son's books, Joe Hill.
Joe Hill's stuff is amazing, isn't it? I've been reading a series of his short stories, which my son Alex, who's also a writer, he said, you've got to read the Joe Hill stuff. And yeah, Joe's got a really clean, acerbic style, hasn't he? Which I really enjoy.
His short story collection, is it 20th Century Ghosts?
Yes.
It's one of my favourites.
That's the one that I read, and yeah, absolutely loved it. So yeah, his the other one, I think it's one called Heart Shaped Box or something. That's on my to be read pile, which is like yours, pretty high. No, nothing like as high as yours, Caroline. Yours is massive.
So you don't want to see my to be read pile. I have a signed copy of Heart Shaped Box.
Oh no, very nice.
The joys of living in Leeds. Occasionally get like a big author.
Yeah, so he visited, did he? Did you meet him?
Yeah.
Wow. So what was he like?
He looks so much like his dad, it's untrue.
Right, and
How
Stephen King has
anyone
a very
did,
distinctive look, doesn't he?
yeah, how anyone didn't know, because no one knew that he was his son for a really long time. That's why he wrote as Joe Hill.
Kudos to him as well for doing that.
But you're like, the minute they looked at an author picture, they must have known. So while we're on the other authors and reading, what have you read recently that you've really enjoyed?
I really loved the Ambrose Parry books. And I say read, I've listened to them. I do a lot of audiobooks because I don't have a lot of time for sitting down and reading, which I really enjoy doing when I can. So yeah, I've really enjoyed those. Ambrose Parry is the pseudonym for Christopher Brookmyre writing with his wife. His wife is an anaesthetist, and Chris has a background a bit similar to mine. Actually, he's worked in newspapers and worked for the BBC. So he's written from the perspective of a journalist called Jack Parlebane, who's definitely quite an inspiration to me. So he has taken a break from that, and he's been writing these stories set in Victorian times in Scotland, in Edinburgh, around a doctor's practice, a surgeon and doctor's practice, and it's linked to genuine history of Dr. Simpson, who developed the anaesthetic that we know today. So it's got lots of little elements of reality in it, but it's also got these wonderful crime stories as well. So yeah, if you like, I mean, it's quite dark in places because that's what Brookmyre does, but it's also very informative and interesting on the medical side, which presumably is what Mrs. Brookmyre does and what she brings to it. So I've been really enjoying those. And also I've just been reading, which isn't crime, but very interesting. I went to a show with Mark Watson, the comedian, up at the Winchester Discovery Centre, close to where we live in Southampton. And Mark is a very funny guy, but he's also a really good writer, and he's written a series of books. And the one that I've just read is called Contacts, and it's basically about a guy who's decided to end it all. And he gets onto a train, sends a message to everybody on his contacts list saying, kind of, goodbye, don't worry, I'm okay, it's just time to go. And then that switches his phone off, and then you see what happens to all the different characters, the key characters in his life, as they slowly find this message and then desperately start trying to find him. So that, again, Contacts, I really highly recommend. So yeah, those are the ones I've been on at the moment, most recently, and I have just given into another Linwood Barclay. I have to say I'm a little bit hooked on his stuff as well.
I am reading Jenny O'Brien.
Yeah.
Whose books I really enjoy. She's based in Guernsey.
Oh, nice. Does she set her stories there?
No, she writes them set in Wales.
Oh, right, interesting.
But they're really interesting.
I noticed a lot of authors, myself included, will pin their crime stories down to a location. Is this something that you like? Do you like to know a location when you're reading?
I really do. I do enjoy going to visit places and then looking for the locations in a crime book. So me and my dad had a lovely wander around Holy Island once, looking for the places where LJ Ross killed people.
This is quite a thing, isn't it?
It is. I really enjoyed Meg Jolly's first book in the D.I. Ward series because there's a point where they go to look for a suspect and it is probably walkable distance from where I live.
Yeah, I noticed that. I've noticed Meg. I checked a few of the details on hers and found them. And Alex Scarrow sets his in Hastings, and I had great fun on Google Earth and Google Maps finding the pubs that his character's gone to, and the house up on the hill, and just also seeing it's really nice to be able to see what the author is describing. I mean, technically you don't need to because they're normally describing it very well, but it's nice to see that. And I do a lot of this myself, and I found in Dead Air, for example, the start of the story, a local radio presenter, the breakfast show jock, is discovered murdered at the base of a transmitter mast. So I spent ages on Google Earth finding the right mast, and it's in a place called, or what's it called, something like Chiltern. It's just gone out of my brain now, but it is actually there in Dead Air, and you can find this, and I've described exactly where the mast is and how you get to it and the road that it's in. So if you were feeling, you know, like you wanted to do a little tour of duty on deaths in the Henry the Sparrow series, you could definitely go to that. And also there's a pub in the Pheasant in Salisbury. I've got to know Salisbury quite well because my younger son went to university, Bournemouth University, and he was on the Salisbury campus. So I spent quite a lot of time in Salisbury and around the cathedral, obviously, and Stonehenge is in there. And it's a really nice thing to do. And I think it sometimes helps as an author too with your plotting. If you've got somewhere, I mean, I do make up names of certain villages, and they're usually quite similar to a village because you want a bit of leeway. But I have a mental image of where that village is so that I can think about journey times. For example, if Lucas is jumping on his bike, his Triumph Bonneville, and going up north of the county, I want to figure out how long it would take him to do that. And it's really helpful to then say, okay, just quickly check on Google Maps how far is it from the centre of Salisbury to this mast location, for example. So that's a really helpful thing to do.
I think a lot of readers like it though. You see it, so many people, don't you? Love to go and visit locations of books. I have 100% gone to visit other countries and other places because of stories. That might just be because I'm a nerd.
I don't think it's a lovely thing to do, and I think it brings you a little bit closer to the story and to the author who put it together. And it's actually a wonderfully flattering thing if people say that they've done that. You know, and occasionally I've had for some of my children's fiction, which has been set in certain places, I've had lovely photos of young readers holding the book in the location, and that is just such a lovely thing. It's a really heartwarming thing to do. So we love it. So if you do it, if you take a photograph of yourself there with the book, or just yourself and a little message, and send it to the author concerned, they will love it, no question. It's a really heartwarming thing.
I don't think, apart from LJ Ross's ones, I don't think I've done it for any authors that I know recently. I've not really traveled anywhere.
Who has?
Not going to happen.
Well, next time maybe.
Yeah, maybe in the future when we can travel again. We will. So we've only got about 8 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about the most I'm not going to ask you that. I'm going to ask you Sam's favourite question.
Okay.
Such a good one. What is the most recent scene you wrote without giving away a spoiler?
Most recent scene. Well, I've just finished the last scene. The most recent one, because I've had a little bit of a break, is the last scene in the Archie Tozer book, A Sharp Intake of Death. So that's set in a pub, and the surviving characters, surviving ones, there's a bit of a kind of a wash up at the pub. And the thing that I can say is that Archie is hypnotized at the beginning of the book by a table magician. You know, one of these people who comes up and does close-up magic, and half of people go, "Oh, look, magic," and everyone else will go, "Oh no, I don't want magic, get away." And Archie's very much like, "Oh God, I don't like magicians, get away." And then he ends up being dared by his friend Charlotte, who's just had a go at him about this horrible front page he's just done about a fading TV star, and totally embarrassed her and body shamed her and everything. And just said, you know, your name mean Archibald in the original German means bold and true, and you're not bold or true, are you? You're just, you know, you're not truthful. And so she convinces him that he couldn't possibly go for 24 hours without lying. And he says, I could tell the truth 24 hours, absolutely no problem. They go, okay, prove it. And the up close magician shows up, and she says, can you hypnotize him to tell the truth 24 hours? And that's how it starts, in the pub at the beginning, and the story then concludes in the same place as well. So that is the final scene that I wrote. That said, you know, many of us will be redrafting and sometimes hopping back to certain scenes to double check things and to make sure that something works in a better way, because occasionally, you know, you'll spot some continuity errors, or you'll just think, no, I need a bit more depth there, or that needs to be a bit tighter, and you want to go back and edit it a bit. So although I say that's the last scene I've worked on, it's entirely possible there was another scene that I worked on in the middle of the book. But honestly, at the moment, I'm still a bit punch drunk from it, so I'm not sure. It's, you know, the edits and the edits and the edits. After a while, your brain just goes, I don't know anymore. I don't know anything anymore. Somebody bring me a jigsaw.
And then my favourite author chat question, like I said, because I'm a nerd, is would you make a graphic novel of your book?
Sorry, say that again?
Would you make a graphic novel of one of your books?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, I really would. I think you can make a graphic novel out of almost any book if the artist is good enough. And I was on the edge of having a graphic novel made of one of my children's books once, and it was a wonderful idea. I really do love the art of graphic novels. I think it is a superb art form, and for younger readers and older ones who, particularly dyslexics, it's an absolute joy to have that imagery and then the words and to lighten the load of the text sometimes. And if I could afford it, I would have, you know, every 3 or 4 chapters I'd have one of those lovely old-fashioned bookplate style things, full color, shiny graphic novel imagery. I would absolutely love that. I know Stephen King did a few in some of his Dark Tower series books, and they're amazing. And remember the old books, you'd even have a piece of fine tissue paper type stuff in front of it to stop the ink from leaching across. I'd love that as well. So yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. And I think Archie Tozer, that it's such a fast-paced story. Once the first murder happens, it just takes off, and that would really lend itself well to graphic novel. If anyone wants to do one, you know, just get in touch.
I don't know anyone who does them.
It's an incredibly expensive art form, and what normally happens is that if a graphic artist wants to work with an author, they have to reach a deal together with a publisher. They have to very much work hand in glove, so that there's enough money up front to create the graphic novel. And, you know, graphic novel has to be incredibly successful to make decent money, just because the sheer print cost of it, the time spent by the artist, you know, which is at least equal to the time spent in writing it. So it's a fascinating area. And as I say, I worked with Mark Cosy for a while and came very close to doing one, but it financially it didn't stack up in the end. So we put it on the back burner, and it sadly never happened. But I haven't counted it out. And I know that some of my fellow other authors like Andy Briggs, who writes the M.G. Cole books, which are another brilliant series, he also has worked, because he works in film as well, he's also worked on the edge of graphic novels too, and just loves the medium. And it's the collaboration. I think many of us adore that, because writing as a children's author or an adult fiction author can be a very lonely business, and working in collaboration with somebody who sees what's going on in your head and can depict it and just give it that extra lift. It's such an exciting and rewarding thing. You know, I would love to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they're a thing I very much enjoy reading. So I just ask out of interest. I think it's always a good question to ask. We have 2 minutes left. Would you like to? I know, it's flown. Would you like to? I could talk to you for hours, to be fair. Like, I haven't even got in half of my questions because we had so many to begin with. Would you like to finish us off with a recap of you and your books?
Yes, if you've just joined us, I'm A.D. Fox, and I write the Henry and Sparrow novels. First 4 are already out, and they begin with The Dying Dolls. And I've just taken a break from writing the Henry and Sparrow stuff so that I can write A Sharp Intake of Death, which is the one about my sleazy tabloid journalist who has got to speak the truth for 24 hours and ends up in a situation of crazy sex, death, murder, being chased by the press, being chased by the police. And it's not only him that gets caught up in this as well. There's a lot of other characters that are having their lives basically ripped apart, not just because Archie's got to tell the truth, but because of the story he ends up on and how they all get dragged into it as well. So that's me. I'm also a children's author in my other life, but I'm absolutely loving the duality of having this second personality of being AD Fox as well. And if you're interested in any of my stuff, you can check it out on adfoxfiction.com, and you can get a free prequel called Undertow if you fancy that, so that you can have a taster and see if my kind of writing is your kind of thing.
Excellent. And then all that's left to say is thanks for joining us.
It's been such a pleasure, Caroline. Thank you. Good luck with your to be read pile, and don't forget to get back to the jigsaws.
I'll try not to.